I'm sorry, I think now it's not very clear. The voice is not coming clearly.
Are you able to hear us now? Is that better?
I can hear your voice, but it's not clear in terms of the words. I can't really hear clearly. Yes, yeah, there's the noise is there.
Okay. Is this a lot better? Is this maybe better? Yeah.
Not really. Maybe one of the moderators can just put the question on the chat, then I can maybe follow up because I really can't hear clearly.
Can you hear me now? Is that more clear? Yes. We can't hear you. No.
He has muted himself.
Okay. Is it? Okay. Excellent. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'll be acting as your moderator today. My name is Renee Rowe, and I have a background in physics, data analytics, quantum technology. And so I'm also the manager of research and market intelligence at the Target Global Group, a PR firm where we believe in driving smarter conversations. So today we'll cover some very timely and important topics, and you're in for a treat because our speakers have very impressive backgrounds. And we will cover a range of topics related to harnessing artificial intelligence, to transform carbon accounting and accelerate climate progress. So each speaker will have 7 minutes to engage us on their topic, and we will use the remaining time for questions. And so we'll get started. So I'd like to introduce our host, Dr. Adewale Adesanya. He's the founder and CEO of Carbon Energy Consulting Inc., where he leads technical modeling and research to support state-level net zero planning. This includes New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. He has nearly 2 decades of global experience across the US, Europe, Africa, especially Nigeria, as well as the Pacific. His expertise includes energy systems modeling, community energy planning, just transition analysis, as well as clean energy policy. And so, as some of you may know, Dr. Adesanya is a frequent speaker on climate and energy solutions. His leadership in clean energy transition has earned him multiple recognitions.
I think it's wonderful.
The slides are here.
Yes, I got it. All right. Good evening, everyone. I know the time is fast spent. It's 6 p.m. already, and I'm very sure that all of you are, getting ready to go back to your various places after a very long day. Okay, so quickly, we're going to be doing justice to the topic that we have today alongside with my co-panelists that are here. And I want to quickly start, lead this discussion with a short presentation right here where we're talking about the ethical use of AI, that's artificial intelligence, to reduce CO2, all right? And, the background, to this is, we all know that AI it's no longer a new that AI is growing globally. Everyone is adopting AI for different purposes and different uses. And then it's important to know, to make sure that we rechannel or channel AI to promote more responsible use that will kind of achieve multidimensional benefits for people and the planet. Because we all know that the background or the back end of AI consumes a lot of energy. It's very energy intensive, it's emission intensive, and there's been a lot of discussions around if this is something that we should be looking at. So the other thing is that we all know that there is a race towards net zero by 2050. Different countries, different nationals that are working towards net zero transition. And one of the critical things from IEA net zero by 2050 analysis is that renewable as well as energy efficiency through behavioral pattern change is going to be very, very critical to getting us to the net zero by that 2050. So there is a lot of focus on renewables technologies, but also on energy efficiency. And with energy efficiency, it's not only about the technology that is being used, but also the shift in behavior. You know, the how individuals were able to adopt our behavior to reduce emission. So, and by that, we decide to conduct, Every Nature Consulting decided to conduct a research that tried to look at innovative deployment of AI for efficient solar energy use. Because when we look at it, everybody adoption of solar is increasing, but with that also is emission. You know, we talk about upstream emission. I wouldn't want to go deeply into that upstream emissions, which has to do with emissions from the production of solar with fossil fuel. So when you have that, it's very important that we look at that. And we did a research, carried out research, because we know that human is very critical in the midst of innovation, and you have to be able to make sure that they're directed towards the use of technology that you have. So the research was conducted to investigate how solar PV users have access to reliable and timely information that will allow them to change their consumption pattern, their behavioral pattern towards the use of solar energy generation, such that they are not in need of continuous upscaling and investments in solar, and thereby, increasing emissions both locally and globally. When I talk about globally, that's upstream emissions. So, and then to also understand factors that will influence PV users, solar PV users' decision in such a behavior modifying EMS, that's energy management system, and to assess PV users' willingness to invest in such a technology. Okay, next one. And then the methods that was deployed in conducting this research include both online survey as well as interviewing home owners that have solar PV to understand how they relate with their energy system and how they are able to shift their behavior based on information that they get from the system. And then we had over 100 participants for both the qualitative and quantitative research. Next slide, please. So, based on very access to real-time information that can really spur them into adjustment or modification of their energy consumption behavior, which in a way means that individuals cannot shift, cannot change anything, even when they have access to that information that is provided onto them. And then they are also not able to make changes based on information that they get. Some don't have access to the information, a very good number, while those that have information are unable to change their behavioral pattern. Okay, and then next slide, please. And based on that, we also try to look at factors that will spur them to invest in EMS technology that will shift their behavioral pattern, that will shift their consumption behavior from solar energy generation. And what we figured out, or what we found out from that result, the research, is that cost and environmental impact, which has to do with CO2 reduction, ranks very high in the mix, in the different among the different factors that are being put together. Next slide, please. And so, with that, we had our response as a company into this. When we realized that individuals, number one, there is a gap in information that that is accessible to them to make that behavioral changes. Okay, when we have that challenge, the other thing is that what kind of solution can really, support them to make that change, that shift to support energy efficiency and energy conservation. And so our approach is to develop an AI-based technology which is under development currently. The TRL level is the polarized stage, and we are working on putting energy information with AI that will make them individuals, those with solar PV and they have generation, to be able to match their load with their consumption, with their generation, and reduce as much as possible the consumption and the need for the grid. Because in many jurisdictions, some are connected to the grid. They have net metering in countries where there are net metering policies, and in other places that are not net metering policies. They still depend on other form of generation. Okay, so next slide, please. Which is the final slide. So based on the model that we are developing, we find out that there are three major impacts of this technology, which is really AI-based, that individuals can use to reduce their CO2, individuals and businesses, because like I mentioned, the interview and the survey include owners and even businesses that make use of solar PVs for energy generation. So on the economic impact, we see that expected impact will provide them higher achievable energy savings, at least 30% increase in return on their investment in solar PV, and the shortened payback period. Payback period is one of the economic terms that means how the number of years they are able to pay, have the benefit from making the payment of their investment. Okay, and then on the social side, the impact include enhanced energy independence. Okay, the meaning of energy independence is that they are not or no longer depending on extra energy generation technology to support the solar system. And so that system, they are more self-sufficient and it gives them that energy independence. Increase clean energy affordability, because once you have your return on investment to be higher, then it gives you higher affordability, especially for low and middle income earners. All right. It also increased solar PV adoption rate. And then lastly, on the environmental side, we measure based on the model that we're developing that at least an average home is going to be able to save 32 pounds of CO2 equivalent, and then higher reduction in energy waste, as well as improved environmental cleanup. So all of this is geared towards increasing the use of AI to be able to influence carbon reduction across residential solar energy users and commercial as well as industrial energy users. So I'm going to stop right there, and I know that my co-panelists are also going to be able to speak to this ethical use of AI. Thank you very much.
That was really interesting to hear about the
Louder and louder, please. Louder, please.
and social and environmental impacts that we have. That was very enlightening. So we'll move on to Denise now. And so I'm excited to introduce Denise Ayabari. an award-winning Uganda climate justice activist, researcher, policy leader whose work sits at the intersection of environmental law, technological innovation, youth leadership in global climate governance. So for 8 years, Denise has been driving climate justice advocacy in Uganda. She currently serves as the youth presidential advisor on climate change and previously served as Prime Minister for the Fifth National Youth Parliament of Uganda, making her one of the most visible youth leaders, shaping the national climate discourse. She is the founder and executive director of Better Life International, an organization in which she has championed tangible community-centered climate solutions, and her belief in technology-enabled climate action led to the creation of the Solar Act, an AI-powered and Internet of Things IoT-supported solution that helps farmers analyze soil, optimize crop choices, track real-time soil metrics, and access market pricing. So Denise, we have two questions for you that we'd love to hear your take on. And so, as carbon credit markets expand, what regulatory gaps currently exist in the oversight of AI-driven carbon measurements and reporting, and how might these gaps lead to carbon fraud or data manipulation? And the second question that we want to address is, what is your vision for a globally harmonized AI governance framework? And this framework should support climate progress while protecting human rights and environmental integrity. And so we want you to use the lessons that you've taken from building your app, your Solar app, and so that would be really interesting to you.
All right, thank you so much. It's been a while since I've been introduced like that, and I think in this rate, even the digital innovation pavilion will start charging me since I've been here today. So thank you so much for that question. I think one of the most challenges we are having today with probably AI-driven carbon accounting systems, it's because they are advancing faster than the policies we actually have to govern that. Whereas AI can dramatically help us in MRV, which is measurement, regulation, and verification, we need to also understand that we need regulatory frameworks to ensure that this AI cannot also be used in terms of carbon fraud or anything like data manipulation or any of the rest. So I think the very first thing that I'm going to address is that there is a lack of standardization of most of these data sets and validation benchmarks that exist within different contexts and ecosystems. So when you look at it globally, no matter if Uganda has a carbon framework, we likely do not have a data set for AI training in carbon MRV in other places. So usually the training modules are biased and they are incomplete, or they're even intentionally having selected data that cannot be the same in Nigeria or Uganda. So if you wanted to do something around it, globally you do not have any of it existing. And then I think this also has created inflated carbon offsets, or even some of the times you have underreported things like emissions. So the lack of standardization has continuously caused that underreporting. But then I think the second thing that I'm likely going to tackle on that is that when you look at the regulatory requirements for any of these AI models, they are likely supposed to have things like in IoT and AI, we call it black boxes, right? So we're going to find that the accounting operation that is known as black boxes does not necessarily exist for most of them. So we think that because of that, you do not have mandatory transparency or even model designs that are supposed to help with the carbon offsets or even the carbon reporting. So that makes it nearly impossible for you to have any audit existing. So if a country is not estimating its carbon, you're likely not going to know most of the developing countries like Uganda or even in the global south. And then the second thing, the offsets, the emissions, the reporting of emissions for the global north is continuously manipulated. And then that does not fit in what we like to call just transition, even in the negotiation. Because at that point, you see, just transition is supposed to be about common but differentiated responsibility, right? So to that extent, then we likely have these countries under-reporting and continuously marginalizing the global south and African countries because we do not have these models or we do not actually globally have something that is going to govern that. But then also the other thing, and then as I go into the second question, there is usually, what should I call it, a weak oversight on some of these carbon offset markets. Because AI now is being used to evaluate some of the offset quality, but yet carbon markets still lack that regulatory body capable of interrogating or even validating any of these algorithm outputs. So to that extent, if we continuously have that, these offsets will only exist on paper, but they will not have any real impact on the people down there who are either planting coffee, who are preserving their trees. So they do not have that impact on those people, or they do not get to see, why should I not cut down my tree? Why should I pick this coffee? So to that extent, I think the regulatory framework is still lacking, and mostly how this plays into Africa and how it plays into the developed countries. Then going into your second question about the solar app and how we have continuously developed it and the lessons we have learned from it, is that we exist in an ecosystem where you do not have data to ensure that you are going to actually impact as many people as possible. What does that mean? And before I go into that, just because I do not have a car, it doesn't make a car bad. So what I'm trying to say is that just because I can't access something, it doesn't make something bad. But in this case, a farmer who doesn't have a smartphone and can't access probably solar app, it's li- oh, sorry. So it's likely going to show that these people cannot maximize the usage of this app. So there are very two things that have been a challenge, that are learning points that I think we also need to continuously develop as we move forward in terms of AI. The Internet of Things as it looks. Nigeria, I think, has the fastest growing ecosystem in terms of tech and AI as compared to any other countries, followed by Kenya. So one thing is that when you design something in Africa, like either as a startup or as a venture capital, you do not have support from government because that problem is looked at as an innovation for someone else because we do not have the means to use that innovation. So that's why I like to say an innovation in Europe is probably not an innovation in Africa. But we are at a point where we need this innovation to exist in Africa. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to first develop some of the systems that help us to use that kind of AI. For example, accessibility to things like data, smartphones, a bad movie. You can't even attend a Zoom meeting. Now, like I didn't use an AI-powered app. So to that extent, the problems that exist is what I have learned, that we need to solve some of the gaps before we adapt to these solutions that are AI-powered or even use IoT to develop more solutions. Thank you.
That was amazing. Highlighting the fact about accessibility and also the lessons that you learned from your app. That was great. Well, we still have a few minutes for you, so I would like to ask you what would be the most important part of a framework? Something that we've seen from the UI AI frameworks, maybe those lessons. What would be your aspirational portion of a framework?
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say is that we need a global oversight like architecture. You see, the same way we have the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the same way probably we need something for AI governance to ensure that we set these global standards that I've talked about. But then we also certify climate AI tools. There are a lot of climate tools that exist, but then we do not have certification for them. So you do not have the legitimacy to use any of these tools or to pitch most of them. And most of the rights are taken away by probably people who can afford it. So I think we need this body to continuously do that, but also investigate some of these AI-enabled climate fraud that exist. Because most of the times we do not get to interrogate it, we get to lose a lot of money in carbon offset and carbon credits, yet we do not get to sort of investigate any of what is existing. But then at a national level, and I think this is very crucial, in as much as Uganda has developed a carbon credits regulatory framework, we need to coordinate national regulations. And this can only be done if we have that kind of body. But then the second thing also that I would want to see and any of these frameworks include in is some use of ethical use for the AI tools that we continuously have for climate adaptation. So we look at this having early warning systems or precision agriculture or any of the other existing. So how can we have this AI be a public good as compared to a private Twitter, as most people who would want to use it as a private Twitter? So I think a globally harmonized framework would be able to work for us. I know that EU has its own, countries are continuously developing their own, but how about we look at a global framework that sets standards that can work for each and every country or certify any of the AI innovation that we have?
Amazing point. And so, for the sake of time, we'll move on. So our next speaker is Mohammed Hussein, and he is a seasoned social foresight and program design strategist from Sri Lanka. He specializes in advancing regenerative systems leadership in climate, democracy, and technology. He has over 15 years of experience in nonprofit management, strategic partnership, and SPV integration. Hussein has built a remarkable career at the intersection of sustainability, social equity, positive youth development. He has worked with a range of global organizations, including the UN, the United Nations, the Commonwealth, the British Council, contributing significantly to youth-led development initiatives and policy advocacy on the global stage. Hussein served as the founding trustee and first ever elected vice chairperson for inclusion and engagement of the Commonwealth Youth Council, a role that further expanded his global systems leadership perspective as he facilitated youth engagement across 53 countries. He has been recognized as a British Council International Climate Champion for his long-standing contributions in the field and has been part of the British Council's delegation Rio Plus 20 in 2012, as well as COP27 and COP28. He is a Rotarian and past president of the Rotary Club of Colombo City and previously served as a head Rotariat in Sri Lanka and Maldives and Chief Sustainability Officer, Rotariat South Asia NDIO. So please welcome Mohammed Hussein. He's the co-founder and director of program strategy of Impact Voices, an independent social innovation intermediary for systems transformation based out of Sri Lanka. And he's joining us from online.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, as well as thank you so much for the for organizing this lovely side event. And this is exactly at 3 a.m. here in Sri Lanka, but I'm so inspired to join this session because I know like how much of hard work that you all do there on the ground at COP30, and just want to appreciate all of your efforts as we put together this session. At any point, if there's any technical challenges or if I'm not audible, please let me know. I'll try to fix it. If not, I'll just continue the conversation. So as I said, I think my background comes mostly from the climate education, social foresight, as well as systems leadership. And for me, the last few years, this has been a very interesting, echoing question, like how do we really going to face these emerging technologies, as well as like how do we really going to make use of emerging technologies to get the best use of the AI as well as other technologies, and how do we really promote inclusion and climate education. So and I have often felt that awareness, even though we discuss a lot about these topics, I have always felt that awareness alone is not enough. We need knowledge that is actionable, that is tangible and relevant to the current context, that will help us understand how to take collective action to address the complex challenges we face every day by the climate change. So, and I think in this particular context and with emerging technologies and the current context of complexities, I think AI has incredible potential to bridge that gap. And my work personally has been focusing more around how do we make use of AI for climate education, as well as to empower more young professionals to fast track some of the actions that we have, as well as to like make sure how we do effective climate interventions in our communities. So in the interest of the time, as well as to make sure that we take something back home at the end of this conversation, because I'm sure it's 6 o'clock there, and then we have had lots of conversations. So I just want to leave a few points. What I think that is important when we talk about AI, especially ethical AI, as well as climate education, and how do we really use this to accelerate our climate action. Number one, I personally think AI must make climate education personalized and accessible and contextual. And this is a very interesting and important area for us to sort of, focus. And this is something that we always have conversation as climate educators, because most climate education platforms right now we see are static. They don't adapt to the learner. And then on this whole conversation right now, we have how AI can change that by maybe translating some of the complex climate science into local realities. It could also be about providing personalizing learning pathways, and also most importantly, using local data to show how climate change affects daily lives. And then there's so much you can do with adapting to the age, language, culture, and the learning style. So this has been one big chunk that we have been focusing, like how do you bring that element in terms of personalization, accessible, and contextualization of climate education. Um, and then, but what is also important here is to look at the ethical layer of all of this, right? Because it's also important these algorithms are transparent and also culturally responsible, and also we avoid biases and misinformation. So how do we really tackle those challenges, and how do you look at this ethical layer while making use of artificial intelligence for climate education is crucial. And my second point that I think it's important for us to highlight and reflect on is how AI can democratize climate literacy by removing some of the barriers that we have historically. That could be the removing the language barriers through real-time translation, or it could be maybe enable voice-based interfaces for those with literacy challenges, or maybe it could also be something like deliver low data microlearning on basic phones, right? So how do we really look at AI as a tool to democratize climate literacy by removing barriers is also something that I think is very important for us to like reflect. And then I'm sure like in the audience, there's so much of experts and people who are working on different interesting work on the ground. So I thought maybe leaving some of these points would be very helpful for us to sort of think what can be done beyond this conversation. And then I think it's also important when it comes to AI, we talk about the ethics, but also it's about the transparency and how do you really make use of transparency in this whole context. So my third point for us to sort of explore and think beyond this conversation is to look around AI-enabled transparency and how we can mobilize action, but not just awareness, right? Because most of the time we have awareness, but then how do you really mobilize and support action on the ground through that? And then I know this is a very complex topic. We have days of conversations around this, specifically on the ethics, transparency on AI. But I think just to give a bit of an idea, it's very important when it comes to transparency. It's also about creating the trust. And then trust creates that whole action, right? So how do we really, how AI can support young people to see real-time, easy to understand climate data. Maybe it could be about their carbon footprints. It could be about their pollution levels. It could be about patterns of deforestation. Or it could be also about, like our previous speaker spoke, energy use trends. But again, what is again important is the data must be accurate, and we need to know like where do we source those data. Is it sourced ethically and also accompanied by safeguards to prevent misuse and manipulation? So these are some of the things whenever we talk about the advantages and how we can integrate AI into education. This is something very important for us to always think of, that ethical layer on top of all of that. So I would just like to leave with that in the first part, just to highlight that as much as we admire and we think AI could support climate action and progress, it's important that we remember that ethics must be at the center and not an afterthought for this. So with that, I would like to maybe like leave the first part, and then I'll come back on the second part with some other points that I have in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein. Those points were great. I especially love the democratized point on language barriers, and maybe that's something that large language models and only trace out language models can achieve in the future. So that's something that definitely. Okay, So the next speaker that we have is Olumide Udu. And so he is known as Mr. Climate. He is a leading Nigerian climate advocate, sustainability expert, and one of Africa's most influential youth voices on climate action. He has 13 years of experience and has built a distinguished career on climate awareness, community resilience, and equitable development across the continent. He is a founder and executive director of the International Climate Change Development Initiative, that's ICCDI Africa, an organization dedicated to building smart generations and closing development gaps through youth empowerment, capacity building, and community-based climate solutions. Olumide is deeply engaged in advancing sustainability through policy influence, climate communication, and digital. So we have two questions for you. Our first question is, how can AI help governments and civil society monitor emissions, track adaptation progress, and strengthen accountability at COP30? And so our second question for you is, how can AI-driven innovation boost early warning systems, climate smart agriculture, and resilient infrastructure for Africa's most vulnerable communities?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, even though I'm speaking at the same time. I don't have to put it together. So, I first of all, let me first of all show that the issue of AI has been a conversation that I think is not that visible yet in Africa, and we all know that. And it's something that when you work with community people, it's going to be very hard to interpret the conversation of AI. Well, based on the conversation we're having, we're trying to see how we can start integrating that into the local communities, or for people to actually to understand that things are changing very fast. And those are your question, the question. I just have some key points for us to actually look at, which I think is very important that it's time for our government to start looking at how they can track adaptation outcome. Because if you don't look at that critically, then the translating of this conversation of AI to local communities is very, very hard. And when I keep saying an adage, they say, when two elephants are fighting, as the grass are suffering, we that we are suffering, AI is not what we want to hear. It's the food, where to sleep, and what to wear. That is what we are talking about. So it's high time for the government to start looking at how can we track adaptation outcomes so that we can help us to see how to measure the level of adaptation that is going on. And that comes through tech, AI, and stuff like that. Then we also need to look at the issue of early warning system. If you look at what is happening in the ecosystem, you'll be able to understand that there's a lot of prediction. And we keep asking ourselves, is it, for instance, in Nigeria, when there is an emergency, and they tell us that it's going to rain tomorrow, and it's not raining tomorrow, do you think that prediction is not right? So let's look at that. Can AI solve that for us? So for me, I think that early warning system, and also to look at the risk mapping is very, very important for us to start looking at, because these are the conversations the community wants to hear from the government. And translating those AI conversations today will take a lot of intensive community engagement, and it's very, very cool. So, and while we are doing this, because of the kind of system we have in Africa and the kind of government, so it's time for us to start looking at accountability and transparency, even with the AI. It's very, very clear and very, very important, because inclusive participation is something that everybody wants to see the outcome. They want to see the end of the conversation. So it is high time for us to start looking at what are the kind of tools, public tools that we can use so that people can be able to adapt and engage on that. How do we make sure that our emission, is there any type of emission tracking that we are looking at, is also very important, so that detecting emission to spot is something that must be in real time detected. So then the second question that is looking at, you said climate smart agriculture. Yeah, for me, I think climate smart agriculture has been a solution of being ideal. but I will link it to smallholder farmers because these are the people that actually produce more of the food we eat in our local community. Let me use a give an example, and it's a question to all of us. If you look at the ecosystem, who produce more of the food that we eat? Is it the big farmers or the local farmers? If you look at it, most of them are local farmers because you and I don't go to the farm or to go and fetch. We come to those local women to buy our food. So it's time for us to start looking at how do we create a precision climate smart agriculture for smallholder farmers. And doing this, AI will empower crop mapping and all of them within channel. We can also look at the smart infrastructure planning and climate risk mapping. It might be a big statement, but for local farmers, by the time they see outcomes, they see solutions, they'll be able to tap into this opportunity. And for them to tap into opportunity, then there's a need for us to do a lot of analysis. See, we have some scientists that can actually be able to translate this word to the community. So, and this will help us to reduce long time, structure costs and all for a lot of it. We also need to look at how we look at digital advisory platform. You mentioned the story of efficacy, how we can also advance in the AI system. But to be sincere with you, if you look at the conversation that is going on, I think this should be on 34. And in that stage, I see that the IPCC keep coming up with documents, either before or after. And a lot of countries are looking at this document to guide the processing. And I 100% in support. If you can have an advisory document, you do it in international panel, or maybe on AI, power of the blah, it will also give us that kind of responsibility to start looking at research, from both research, from scientists, even professors that can actually do ground research to come up with the concrete information that will help to improve our areas. Because when we look at Africa, I will say that we are still on a journey that we are learning on how to adapt all these things. So I think it is a robust conversation for us to see that AI is a very big conversation. But if you and I can understand, then it is high time for us to cascade this to the grassroots so that both local farmers, both people that are the recipient can actually have this sense and understanding that AI is the next goal that a lot of people are talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have about 14 minutes left, and I just want to open up the floor for any questions. I know that we've had some very interesting discussions, and we've had a lot of different perspectives when it comes to building innovation and also the community impact, as well as the ethical use cases. And so we want to know if you guys have any questions when it relates to that, or even just anything else, when it relates to efficacy across the global south, especially when it comes to technology use or AI use or anything like that.
I just want to be realistic. I'm not an AI expert, but it's a very big question for us as an African that when you look at the landscape, of Africa, you really to understand that we always have the mentality that nothing works. And for AI to actually have that kind of ownership, do you really think political will is not going to make an impact in it? Because let me give you an instance. I want to use Nigeria, the present minister, he has been putting a lot of ideas into the system, but you've never seen any government official adapting that into the system of what they're doing. Is it that it's complex? Is it that maybe there's, let me say politics, there's no money in it, or they're not looking at the long-term opportunities? Because all what we talk about AI should be an investment opportunity, both for the local people and the people who are, the learner, or let me say professors, right? So my question is, maybe anybody else can, is it possible for us to say that political will can actually push the, for instance, implementation of this kind of panel, or can it actually put a sense of urgency for our political leaders that AI is the next opportunity for Africa to grow? Because you see a lot of action across Europe, a lot of things that is happening that before you think twice, you say, this cannot work in Africa, don't deceive yourself. Yeah, I remember the other Uber, nobody is driving the Uber. I'm not seeing any driver. How many of us can enter Uber and take driver in Nigeria? Everybody is scared. I'm just giving you, so is it political will can actually push this? Because without political will, anything you bring to any country now have to be branded with whether as a assembly or before they pass on the so I just think that's all. Thank you very much. And I want to appreciate the panelists. I was telling my friend that we could get a good conversation, that it is a bigger than this platform we have. The hard thing is that we need to ask ourselves, I think is what my brother said, that our political leaders understand what AI is. Therefore, they need to be taught what is the importance of AI, because they're the ones going to pass the regulation that the minister is talking about. So we need to build the capacity of peace policy making people. We need to understand the relevance of AI. Going into the climate change perspective, we should look at AI as opportunity. But as we look at AI as opportunity, the application of AI intervention will differ because of the level of development. In Europe, the application can be applied faster, but when you go to Africa, whereby there's limited penetration of smartphones, it becomes very, very hard. If we link it to the carbon market, we're having a conversation today, and I was saying that carbon market, carbon credit is an opportunity. When we look into the meta-based solution that we have, but how many experts do we have that can actually certify the community and say that this is the benefit that you get out of carbon market? Now, when you're reading all of the application that can actually help them calculate the carbon credit they're having, that's a different perspective. I think that young people and the conveners of this discussion, it is very fundamental that we need to continue expanding this conversation because AI is there to stay. And that's a tool for our generation. If the young people understand AI, and the young people, the political leaders will come into when it's affecting them. And they will either come to stop it because they don't want something negative, or for those who understand, will promote it and take advantage of the opportunity. Thank you. Yeah, well, if you permit me to sit down. All right, thank you very much. I just want to comment on two things. One is what Dr. Adewale mentioned about energy efficiency, right? I think you are very spot on navigating the direction to promote energy efficiency. And I think that with the kind of energy deprivation we have in Africa, we leverage energy efficiency methods to improve access and the energy that you mentioned. Maybe cut usage from urban centers, urban environments, and deploy more to rural areas. I think there's a lot of potential in that. I think Africa countries should of course look into that. But on the flip side of it is the role of artificial intelligence we're discussing in all of this. And I think in the long run, artificial intelligence is going to play a lot of role. For instance, in monitoring, who's using energy, what level of energy they're using, and how government can, sort of interact in that space to cut down energy uses, where there are no need for it. What I just want to say is that as it is with technology generally, I think that's the kind of opposite that we see with artificial intelligence. And the question I will ask is, for instance, you go to the airport today and you're asked to do a self-checking. As an alternative to walking to the counter, how receptive are you to going for a self-checking, right? I think that the apathy with AI is the same as we have with technology. But the example I will give is that when you have a newborn, right? There's no newborn that wants to start to eat solid at any point in time. You have to have that will, the parental will, the political will, to force solid food at some point down the throat of newborn, right? And I think that's what we should look in the direction of in the context of Africa. The policymakers will have to take a decision, but unfortunately, you have the class of policymakers who are much older and will likely have greater apathy to technology, not just AI, but even technology generally. I remember, for instance, in Nigeria, before we had the revolution around communication, you would have a situation where people can only use a mobile phone. But now everybody owns a mobile phone. So I think it's the willingness, the political will, but it will take an intergenerational lapse to create that willingness across the different arms of government, where you have the legislators passing the relevant policies and then the executive also implementing those policies. So I think that willingness is very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And I think that ties back to not only the accessibility issue, but also the willingness to adapt. So that's a two-part issue. And I think it's a very good one that you covered. So can we have 2 minutes to answer that question that Olumide had when it comes to regulatory bodies and their intervention and efficacy when it comes to AI implementation? Okay, so thank you. I'll just start by answering what Mr. Climate asked about the political will and whether it's really necessary. I think for something as small as TikTok and how privacy is protected, or how it requires guidelines, or even how it requires oversight authority, when it comes to AI, it should be the same on tech. Because if we do not have political will, then we do not drive the regulatory frameworks that we're talking about. But then a second thing that I really think that is very crucial and necessary is why we need political will. You see, if we don't have that political will, AI will continuously become something that is a luxury, yet it is supposed to be a public good. It will remain in the hands of global tech companies who just look at it as making profit. Yet it should be the future of Africa, because when it comes to things like climate smart agriculture, comes to things like a warning system, irrigation, all these things can be enhanced by things like technology and AI. So if we do not include the government to democratize things like data, or to ensure that every individual can be able to access AI, then I think it becomes problematic if we don't have that political. I think it's needed more than ever. But like you said, it will take a collapse of a generation to have that political control. Because our governments are usually thinking, where do I get to benefit? Is there money? Where is my benefit in all that? So we need to ensure that it becomes a public good and it doesn't become a luxury, and that it is democratized to every individual. Every individual can be able to access data. And then the second thing is about the protection, the ethical guidelines that govern this AI. How can we protect people's data? How can we ensure that there are oversight institutions that are likely going to see this? And then I think we have seen it on other applications that exist, like TikTok, like I gave that as an example. If we do not have that, then this AI collapses when we don't have the political will in Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that comment. And I think I'm going to tie it down to saying the collapse of intergeneration. Especially on education. Well, before I go to the education, answering the question, which is a very good question, I know that with respect to Nigerian jurisdiction, there's a lot that is growing in the midst of information and the expansion and integration of work with data science Nigeria, trying to expand on AI. I don't know if you're aware of Data Science Nigeria, which is about data science and AI deployment, using AI for educational purposes for individuals to learn in different languages. So Uzi was talking about, how we can also deploy that in, individuals being educated by how much emissions that they emit, how much energy they use. So it's not across these days, everyone has smartphone. I was very surprised when my father, who is about in his 80s, had went on Facebook and generated this AI that made him look like a general. And I was I was just laughing. And then, so when you look at the different, the age collapse, generational collapse, every one of them, everybody has access to smartphone. But the most important thing for us to be able to regulate that is what do we deploy that for, because of the back end impact on the use of, because it's very energy intensive. Every search releases a certain amount of CO2. Every AI search will try to do any coding of such, there's high level of emission that it releases. And so when we have all of that, and everybody knows that, okay, if I'm going to deploy this thing for this particular purpose, how does it benefit the planet? How does it benefit the people? And what regulation is being put in place to make sure that it's well used to the general benefit. So I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you for everyone who took this time out. We know it's late in the day and we know it's a lot going on. So we appreciate your time, and we also appreciate all of the discussions on how to reduce CO2 reductions, outcomes. And it was great hearing from everyone. Thank you.